My son pushed my hand off his shoulder and said, "Don't claim me in public," as reporters took photos. But when the headline broke about the grant recipient, cameras spun back to me. His ego broke. They say you never forget the sound of a door slamming in your face. I say there's something sharper, the soft slap of your own hand falling back to your side because your son has just knocked it away in front of a wall of flashing cameras. If you're reading this, tell me where you're watching from, your city, your street, so I know where this moment lands in the world, because for me, it landed on the marble steps of the Civic Hall under a banner that called my son a visionary. I stood to his left as he smiled for reporters. He'd made sure I was half a step behind, cut off by a shoulder, a jawline, a bodyguard's elbow. I didn't mind. I'm not hungry for the front of anything. When the first question hit him, how does it feel to be the youngest recipient of the grant? He lifted his chin in that way he does when he wants the light to find him. I felt my hand rise on its own, a father's reflex, fingers resting on the curve where his shoulder met his suit. It was a gentle touch, a quiet blessing. He didn't even turn his head. He just dropped his shoulder and pushed my hand off with 2 fingers, like he was brushing away lint. "Don't claim me in public," he said through his smile, teeth still showing for the cameras. And the reporters, who are trained to smell small storms, heard something in the air and kept clicking. My hand fell. I let it hang. I looked at the flag whipping on the pole and told myself it was only wind making my eyes sting. The microphones moved closer. His wife, standing on his other side, leaned in and put her arm through his. She was careful. She knows angles. The ribbon cutting was 10 minutes away, and everyone wanted a pull quote. "We built this together," she said, meaning herself, her family name, their bright friends. We, like a net that did not include me. A reporter tried to lift my face into the frame. I stepped back. The bodyguard, a man whose neck was too thick for his collar, nudged me farther. "Sir, let's keep this area clear." It was almost funny. The grant banner flapped, the seal of the foundation gleaming, the words "Innovate" and "Impact" printed big enough to stamp the sky. My son was the headline. He knew it, I knew it, everybody knew it. I tasted steel in my mouth, not anger. Something cooler, flatter, like a coin held between the teeth. I watched the photographers circle him, and I remembered the weight of him as a toddler asleep on my chest, the way his little hand used to grab my finger and not let go. Now he had 2 fingers left for me, and they were both pushing me out of the picture. One reporter almost asked something about family, but the host cut in to announce the next photo op. The crowd clapped. I clapped too. You might wonder why. I didn't say anything back, a line sharp enough to draw blood. But I don't shout in public. I don't pull people back onto the good path with force. A man who does that often pulls too hard and breaks what he means to save. I prefer something else. The slow turn of a key you didn't know was already inside the lock. So I adjusted the cuff of my old suit, the one my wife once called my honest jacket, and took 1 step to the side where the stairs began to curve around the hall. From there, I could see my son's face in the cameras, but they could no longer see mine. That suited me. I listened to the next question, the next answer. He thanked his mentors and his board and the foundation. He did not thank me. I nodded to the rhythm of his words like I was listening to rain. The world loves a clean story, or thinks it does. My son had learned to give them one. You might be reading this from a bus stop, or a kitchen table, or a night shift break room. You might be shaking your head at me, telling me I should have left that stage and never turned back. But a man doesn't walk away from his own work like it's a shirt he can toss in a bin. He stands where the structure meets the sky and checks the bolts. He runs a level across the heart. He pays attention. That's all I did on those steps. I paid attention. I watched the pride in his eyes harden into something else, a thin crust over deeper fear. He is good at hiding it from the world. He is not good at hiding it from me. Cameras make people act like glass. They can't help showing what's underneath. A woman in the crowd, older, gray hair like rain, shook her head and looked at me with a small sadness. I gave her the smallest smile I had. I wanted to tell her, "It's all right. It's all right." We are only at the beginning of this story. The worst thing you can do to a young man who tries to throw his father out of the frame is to give him a mirror at the right moment. He will see himself, and it will be his own face that stings. When the ribbon finally cut, the crowd moved the way crowds do, like a river that thinks it knows where it's going. My son and his wife disappeared into handshakes and the soft congratulations that smell like perfume. I waited at the edge until the sharpest lights cooled a little. Then I walked down the steps, through the quieter churn, and out to the courtyard where the city's noise swallowed the leftover applause. The sun was sliding behind the municipal tower. A boy on a bicycle traced circles in the shade like a compass, drawing a life he didn't know yet. The marble under my shoes still held the day's heat. I put my palm on it and tried to imagine it carrying whose weight it carried. It did not. Stone is older than pride. You want to know how we got here. You want to know the other voice in this story, the one that isn't the slap of a hand or the click of a shutter. The truth is, humiliation doesn't arrive alone. It brings a choir of memories, and each memory sings in a voice you recognize. Mine began with my wife's laugh echoing off our kitchen tiles on a humid summer midnight. She used to stay up late with me. When the paperwork came in heavy waves, I would bring home thick envelopes tied with string, and she would cut them open with the dull knife we used for everything. She'd sit cross-legged on the floor, with the fan making her shawl flutter, and read application forms or donor letters out loud, making funny voices for the parts that were too pompous. Our son, 8 years old, sometimes slept on the rug, pencil still in his hand, a comic half drawn on the back of a grocery list, because I was careful with paper then. We were always careful. Careful is a blessing in disguise. She was the one who taught me that care could be loud if you needed it to be, and quiet when the world got noisy. "You'll build it," she said once, chin on her knees, looking at me like I was an engine she trusted. Something that lasts, something that helps. She never loved my name in bright lights. She loved it on the list of volunteers, on a thank you card pinned to a school wall, on the corner of a scholarship letter. That night, our son woke and asked if he could help. She smiled and pulled him into her lap. She made him stamp envelopes with a little rubber stamp that left a crooked star next to my signature. "This is how we do it," she told him. One careful mark, and then another. He pressed each star too hard at first, leaving ink puddles on the paper. She guided his hand. She always did. I watched her fingers wrapped around his small ones, and the sight built a house in my chest I still live in. Years later, after she got sick, after the doctor's voice got too gentle to trust, I took the night shifts at the community center to keep my own mind from collapsing. I watched kids come in with eyes too old for their faces, and I pushed paperwork for grants that took too long to arrive. I learned all the codes, all the phrases that made donors feel the right kind of warm. Impact, sustainable, transformative. She teased me for it in the early days when teasing was still possible. "Look at you, my poet of receipts," she'd say, pulling me in by my tie as if it were a bell rope. After she was gone, the words felt like sand in my teeth. I used them anyway, not for speeches, for doors. Words can be keys if you turn them at the right angle. Our son was 14 when he asked if we could go see the lake she loved one more time. I drove us before dawn, thermos rattling in the cup holder, the road as empty as a new page. He didn't speak much then. He had the kind of silence that builds ladders inside. He climbed his, and I let him, standing below with my arms out in case he fell. We reached the water before the sun. The air smelled like pine and damp stone. He threw flat rocks to make the surface skip. Every time a stone kissed the water and jumped, he smiled like he'd cheated the rules of the world. "She'd like this," he said, and I said, "She does." He looked at me sideways, then he nodded. It was a small boy's nod, but it carried a man's promise. I felt proud and scared together, which is a father's favorite sickness. When he was in his last year of school, I told him I had set aside a fund for him to try whatever he wanted after graduation. Not a fortune, fortunes are loud and unruly, but enough to breathe, enough to try. He looked at me like I had opened a door he didn't even know was in the room. He said he wanted to work on ideas that changed how people live, and I laughed. Not at him, but at the way a certain age makes verbs look easy. I told him change is only a stack of small repetitions high enough to see the horizon. He nodded again, older this time. He visited the center with me, watched the kids practice chess on boards with pieces that didn't match, and he absorbed the world with a bright hunger. His teachers sent letters that praised him in the warm, round phrases schools use. I took those letters and placed them like bricks at the top of a wall my wife and I had been building since the day he first said, "Da." We framed them and put them in the hallway. He hated that. "It's embarrassing," he said. A teenager's sigh making a wave through the house. Good, I told him. Let your better self make you blush sometimes. It means he's ahead of you. The first time he stood on a stage, I stood at the back. He saw me as he stepped to the microphone and lifted 2 fingers by his side like a small hello, meant only for me. He was nervous. He said, too many times. But he talked about making low-cost tools for small clinics and about the way bureaucracy can choke a good idea before it takes its first breath. I watched 2 men in suits whisper to each other and nod. I saw a woman in a cheap blazer wipe her eye. It was not the speech that moved them. It was the ghost of my wife in his voice. She had a way of making people believe that a thing could be both tender and fierce. He inherited that in the same way he inherited the small scar on his chin from the time he fell off his bicycle and refused stitches. He wanted the world to see him. I wanted the world to see the work. For a while, those 2 desires were the same color. When the foundation announced the grant he just stood beneath, they did it with a paragraph that sounded like it had been written by someone who drinks coffee too late at night, catalyzing the next generation of impact leaders. I read it and felt tired. But then I looked at the line that mattered, the part about what the money would do, whom it would reach, and I felt my wife's hand on my back again, pushing me forward through time. Our son came home that day with his phone buzzing like a bee in a jar. He hugged me in the doorway. He smelled like sweat and rain. He said, "It's happening," and I smiled and said, "Good." I told him to sit, to eat, to sleep, to keep his feet on the ground. He nodded, already half gone to the next meeting. The newspaper sent a photographer to our house. He asked if we could take a picture in the kitchen. My son said no. He wanted a clean background, the studio where everything could be controlled. I didn't blame him. The world is unkind to mess. I told the photographer to take one of me by the old wooden table anyway. "It's where the stamps were," I said, and he looked confused, but he took it. You may think I am blaming his wife for the space that opened between us later. I am not. She is sharp, yes, and loves him the way a person loves a yacht when they grew up by the sea with nothing but a plank and a rope. She polishes what she touches. She trims. She sails. She also flinches when the wind turns. I watched her build a brand around him like a careful cage. Lights, angles, careful captions, polished shoes. A father becomes a shadow in that frame. People talk about how sons try to outgrow their fathers like trees trying to outgrow their seeds. They forget that sometimes it is the forest around the tree that says, "Look over here," pointing away from the root. Still, a tree knows where its water came from. It knows, even if it pretends not to. So, when he brushed away my hand on those steps, when he said, "Don't claim me in public," it did not feel like a knife. It felt like a test of a system we had built long before the cameras, long before the stage, long before the grant. The system was simple. Do your work. Let the noise pass. Keep the receipt. And my receipts were not the paper kind. They were the faces of boys and girls at the center, the light in their eyes when a small tool did a big job, the ledger of nights my wife and I spent at the kitchen table building a future out of envelopes and crooked stars. I don't collect trophies, I collect proof, and proof sits quietly until someone mistakes it for nothing at all. I stood there a moment longer after the ribbon fell and asked the air to carry a question to my wife. "Are you watching this with me?" The air, being what it is, did not answer. But a breeze did lift and shift the banner so that for a second the big words "visionary recipient" floated just above my son's head like a crown that wasn't sure it belonged there. He didn't notice. He was busy shaking hands. I put my hands in my pockets. My fingers found the stiff edges of an old photograph I carry. My wife sitting by the lake, hair pulled back, eyes on our boy as he tried to skip a stone and finally did. 5 skips, 6, 7. He yelled and turned to check if we had seen. We had. We always had. If you're still with me, tell me. Comment where you're reading this from, because I want to imagine the map of eyes on this page. Imagine a line from your place to that marble step where I stood, to our kitchen, to the lake. Draw it in your mind. That's the path the story will follow. It begins with a hand falling and a sentence spoken through a practiced smile. It moves backward through a house of memories that still smells of tea and ink. It moves forward toward a door only one of us knows exists. Not a loud door, a quiet one. You can open a quiet door in a loud room and no one will notice until the air changes. You asking where this is going? Don't worry. We haven't arrived at the corner where the wind turns. We're walking there step by careful step, and I am not lost. The celebration dinner was set for the same evening, a small private gathering, the invitation said, though the ballroom they chose had ceilings high enough to make any applause echo like thunder. I stood outside the hotel long enough to watch the revolving door spin, faces slicing across the glass, laughing, hurried, hungry. A young man in a red tie at the check-in podium ran his finger down the tablet and frowned. Name? He asked without looking up. I gave it. He hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, sir. You'll have a guest wristband. He slipped a thin band across my palm like a clinic tag and waved a woman in sequins ahead of me. Inside, the lights were the soft gold that flatters youth. The air smelled of lemon polish and new money. Across the room, my son stood between two banners with his head tilted at the precise angle that made the photographer's lenses love him. His wife touched the line of his jaw with a fingertip, a gesture gentle and staged at the same time, and her parents stood just behind like a pair of bookends that had cost too much. I tried not to drift into their gravity. I stayed near the wall where a potted plant hid a chip in the plaster. I have spent most of my life near walls. You learn things there. You hear the truth that bounces off the front of the room and comes back stripped of its makeup. The first course arrived in a swarm of silent servers. A coordinator with a clipboard worked through the crowd like a shepherd, placing people in their proper places. When she reached me, she smiled a professional smile that could have belonged to any year and any city. We're keeping a standing section for non-speakers, sir, she said. There's a high-top table there, if you'd be comfortable. I looked down at the card in her hand. It had my son's initials stamped in gold, and below them a list of names. Mine was not one of them. Comfortable, I repeated, like it was a foreign word I was trying on for the first time. I nodded to let her go. A screen rolled down, the lights dimmed. A video started, a polished timeline of a life. School trophies, lab benches, a drone shot of a campus green, faces of mentors with their posed sincerity. Somewhere in the editing room, a careful hand had trimmed the edges of photos that would have shown me. A birthday image that once had my sleeve visible at the far left had been cropped tighter so that only the cake and the boy who was no longer a boy remained. A graduation scene where my shoulder had anchored the frame now floated without gravity, a smiling face unmoored from the man who had pinned his gown. I watched the cuts the way a carpenter watches a wall go up and knows where the studs should be. It wasn't anger that touched me then. It was an old, clear feeling, like the first cold sip of water in the morning. They had made a clean myth. Clean myths cost extra. When the lights lifted, the room sighed as if it had been holding its breath together. Applause rose, died, rose again. A man I recognized from the foundation board clapped my son on the back, two hard thumps that said, "You're one of us," and also, "Don't forget who we are." The mother-in-law approached me with a flute of champagne and a pitying tilt to her head. She has a way of speaking that feels like you are standing in a draft. "So good you could join," she said. "It's quite a night for the young generation. You must be proud." She let the last word hang in that very modern way, where it is both question and dismissal. "I am," I said. I didn't take the glass. Her smile cooled a few degrees. "There's a press wall for family portraits," she added, a little too quickly. "But I think the immediate circle is going first. You understand?" She didn't wait for my answer. She turned and beckoned to a photographer, who nodded and lifted his camera. I watched her steer the picture like a small boat, trimming anything that might slow its speed. Later, when the toast began, I felt the weight of a microphone pass near me and then skip my hand like a stone skimming water. The mentor spoke about raw talent. The board member spoke about visionary leadership at 28. The wife spoke about building together. My son spoke last. He thanked his team, his wife, her family, the foundation. He thanked the city. He thanked a teacher from 5th grade by name, which the room loved because it made everything seem rooted. He did not look toward the wall where I stood. He finished with a line about the future belonging to those who show up unclaimed. And the word unclaimed threaded through me like a stitch pulled too tight. The crowd rose to its feet. My son laughed into the applause and raised his glass. The gold lights caught on the rim and made a tiny crown of fire that vanished when he drank. After, in the hallway where the noise thinned, I caught a piece of conversation drifting from the green room. I didn't intend to listen. Eavesdropping was not a habit I'd kept from my poorer years, but sometimes words come find you. "He'll make it about himself," a voice said, someone young from the PR team, eager to prove they were guarding the brand. "He's old school. He doesn't get how we're positioning this." A second voice, my son's, softer than he uses on stage. "He won't. He's quiet. Just keep him out of frame." The door closed, muting what came next. I stood very still until a server brushing past with a tray of empty glasses snapped me back to the hall. The sound of the glass feet chimed together like cautious bells. I went downstairs and out into the night and let the city air wash the ballroom smell off me. On the walk home, I passed the window of a small bakery that had closed an hour earlier. The owner had left a tray of bread ends by the door for anyone who needed them. Two teenagers in hoodies laughed softly and nudged each other as they chose pieces, and the girl broke off a heel and handed it to an older man who had been pretending not to look. The steam lifted from the bread like a promise. I stood across the street, hands in my pockets, and felt my jaw unlock. The human world goes on, I thought, even while a certain kind of world tightens its tie and says your name is a mess. I crossed when the light changed, nodded to the teenagers, and picked up one end slice for my walk. The crust cut my gums a little and tasted of salt. I liked it. At home, the kitchen clock was the only sound. Its tick had never learned to hurry for anyone. I put water on the stove and took the old thermos down, the dent still in its side from the day my son, small and running too fast, knocked it off the table and gasped like he'd broken the moon. The safe in the corner was behind a curtain my wife had sewn herself. She chose a quiet pattern, blue with very small white leaves. I stood there for a while and kept the curtain closed. I didn't need the contents to know what they were. I only needed the fact of them, the way a locked door is a kind of sentence even when you don't read it out loud. The pot began to whistle. I turned the flame down and made tea the way she taught me. Pour a little hot water into the cup first to warm it, swirl, pour it out, then fill the cup proper. "Give the cup a chance," she used to say. "It holds better that way." It is an odd thing to stand in your kitchen and feel the weight of a city's applause on your shoulders. It sits there like a coat you didn't ask to wear. I shrugged once and it slid off onto the chair. On the table lay an envelope I hadn't opened, delivered earlier in the day by courier with a sticker that said, "Urgent because the world believes urgency persuades people to care." The letterhead carried the Foundation's seal. Inside, on heavy paper, were the week's media notes and a polite confirmation. The donor profile requested by Communications would be published the following afternoon, pending any last-minute changes. A draft of the headline sat in quotation marks. It was bland, careful. It avoided words like anonymous and behind the scenes, and instead used phrases like founding gift, in memory of, program seed. There was a blank where the name should go, a blank we had held for a year, while the paperwork worked its way through committees, while the lawyers decided what counted as recognition and what counted as vanity, while I said, wait twice and later, once, because I wanted the work to stand first. I read the draft and placed it face down. Then I turned it over again. Names matter, yes, not because they shine, but because they anchor meaning when storms come. My wife's maiden name was on the first line. That was the only crown I had ever cared to see. My phone lit up and buzzed across the wooden table, a small creature trying to escape. A message from my son. "Media will try to pull you aside tomorrow. Please don't engage. We're trying to keep a clean narrative. Love you." I looked at the words for a long time. There was no punctuation at the end. The sentence felt like a hand extended and then pulled back before it touched. I typed, "Rest well." I deleted it. I typed, "Proud of the work." I deleted that too. Then I put the phone face down. Not a refusal, just a pause. There are words you save so that when they finally come, they can carry the weight they deserve. I drank my tea and listened to the clock do the only job a clock knows. You might wonder what kept me from calling him then, from throwing the window open and letting the night hear me. But this is the truth. I don't win by shouting. I don't win by taking the stage he's hired. I have known men who think making noise is the same as making change. They leave smoky rooms and think the air is different because their throats burn. I learned a quieter way. A letter on the right desk at the right hour. A clause in a contract that no one reads until the day the world tilts and the words catch the light. Once, long ago, a donor tried to claim credit for something he hadn't paid for, and I watched a program director, a woman with steady hands, slide a file across a table at a board meeting. The file made a small sound when it met the wood. "This is the proof," she said in a voice that could have belonged to a librarian. The room went still. It was the stillness that made the truth sharp. I took that lesson like a seed and planted it deep. Past midnight, I did open the safe. The hinges didn't squeal. I'd oiled them before winter. Papers, yes. Certificates. A thin leather folder with our boy's first scholarship letter. The stamp of my wife's crooked star, faded but still visible in the corner. Behind them, a packet marked with the Foundation's archive number. The ink trail of meetings and votes and signatures that brought a grant into the world without a name attached. And then, with one attached, but not on the stage, not on the banner, on the ledger that matters when the auditors come, when the story is told properly. My name sat there plain, not a boast, a record. I didn't touch the papers long. I don't need to handle proof to remember it's mine. I slid the folder back and closed the door of the safe with the same care I use when I put a sleeping child in bed. Sleep did not find me quickly. The house had its own soft noises that only rise at night. The fridge sighed. The neighbor's gate clicked. Somewhere a dog tried out a dream bark and then thought better of it. I lay on the couch and looked at the ceiling, where, years ago, my son had stuck glow-in-the-dark stars and then laughed because they looked like mold when they didn't shine. There are imprints we don't notice until the light changes. You learn to wait for the angle that reveals them. In the quiet, I let my mind walk the path ahead. Tomorrow's panel, with cameras again. The media note going live, the calls it would spin, the questions it would raise. Why didn't you tell us? Was it merit? Was it influence? Words like that love to stick in the throat of a good thing. I let them spin and then slow. The truth is simple. We built a fund in her name. We built it to help. It found the best candidate by the process we promised. It chose him. That is messy and clean at once, and most people prefer one or the other, not both. But life doesn't keep tidy borders. Near dawn, my phone buzzed again. Not my son this time. A journalist whose name I knew because she asks careful questions. Confirming donor profile runs tomorrow at 4 p.m. The message read, "Will include the story of the program's origins per archive. Any corrections?" I typed, "Spell her name right." Then I typed her name to make sure the diacritics were clear. The journalist sent a thumbs-up emoji, which felt like a child's stamp on a very adult paper. I almost told her not to use words like visionary for me. I almost told her not to try to force a neat bow at the end. But you cannot micromanage how the wind will move when you open a door. You can only open it and stand to the side and let the air pass. In the morning, before the city had finished wiping the sleep from its eyes, I went to the center. The cleaning woman, Amna, unlocked the side door for me and shook her head at my clothes. "You wore that jacket again," she said, smiling. "Your honest jacket." I told her it had survived worse nights. We walked through the hall together, and she told me her youngest had answered a question in class without raising his hand and been gently scolded. He said, "But the answer was ready, and I didn't want it to get cold." She laughed. I fixed a loose chair leg while she talked, my hands moving on their own. Two boys set up the mismatched chess pieces. One pawn was a button, another was a bottle cap. "Use what you have," I told them. "It's the same game." On the notice board, the week's schedule curled a little at the corners. I smoothed it down with my palm. The paper warmed under my touch and lay flat again. Small victories. On my way out, a thin envelope slid under the door from the mail slot. No return address, but I didn't need one. Inside was a brittle photograph of my wife in her nurse's uniform, standing outside a clinic with peeling paint and a line of mothers that reached around the corner. On the back, in her handwriting, a note I had seen 100 times but had forgotten how it smelled of ink and soap. "Do the work, then let the work speak." I laughed once, the short kind that clears the throat. I put the photo in my breast pocket, over the place the world still calls a heart. By noon, my son's face filled the glass wall screens in the lobby of the Civic Center for a panel discussion. I didn't sit in the audience. I leaned against a column and listened to the words move like polished stones from mouth to mouth. A moderator asked about roots. My son said, "I had to learn to build without safety nets." And a murmur of admiration rippled through the room. The column was cool against my shoulder. I closed my eyes for one slow breath. When I opened them, a child in a yellow shirt was looking up at me, bored by adult talk, fascinated by the way my tie had a tiny coffee stain near the seam. "You missed a spot," he whispered solemnly. I bent a little so we were level. "I'll leave it there," I said. "It reminds me not to drink too fast." He nodded, satisfied by this logic. He ran back to his mother, who gave me a small, grateful smile for making boredom feel like a game. People say escalation looks like a staircase. You can see it coming, step after step. That is sometimes true, but sometimes escalation looks like a quiet floor that tilts a degree every hour until the glass begins to slide. It was like that now. I felt the tilt. The exact degree didn't matter. What mattered was that I had shoes with good grip, and a hand on the rail, and a map in my pocket drawn long before this building went up. I didn't need to climb fast. I only needed to keep my balance. And I did, listening to panel words about change measured in headlines, about impact measured in likes, about legacy measured in the height of a stage. When the panel ended, microphones swept the aisle like fishing nets. Reporters reeled in quotes. I let the current pass and stepped into the quiet between one room and the next. The afternoon sun landed on the civic steps and lit the marble like the inside of a seashell. I felt my phone vibrate against my ribs. A calendar reminder chimed, profile, 4 p.m. I looked at the time and felt a small, calm click inside my chest, like the sound of a lock when a key returns to the position it was made for. Not triumph, not revenge, just alignment. The kind that lets a door open without a squeak, without a speech, without a finger raised to the cameras. Not today, I thought, stepping onto the sun-warmed stone, not shouting, not pushing, not claiming. Let the work speak. Let the record show. Let the world see. Not because I point, but because the light shifts and the lines appear on their own. At 3:45, the lobby outside the Civic Hall hummed like a hive that had learned a new song. People in suits checked their watches, then their phones, then each, others' faces. Sunlight lay across the marble like warm water. I stood by the far column, hands behind my back, the old photograph of my wife steady against my chest. The boy in the yellow shirt from earlier had fallen asleep on his mother's shoulder, open-mouthed, trusting the world to hold him. Trust is a kind of gravity. It keeps you where you belong until someone decides to pretend it isn't there. I watched the minute hand lift itself toward 4. I didn't count down. I don't like to chase time. I like to meet it at the door when it arrives and say, "Come in, I've been expecting you." The first vibration hit the room at 3:58. One phone, then another, then a small wave as if the floor itself had caught a shiver. A woman near me glanced down and made the face people make when a headline rearranges the furniture in their heads. She nudged her colleague. Someone said, "Is this live?" A man in a navy blazer tried to step out of the current and bumped his shoulder against the column where I stood. "Sorry," he said without looking up. The push notification sat on his lock screen like a flare. The foundation's name, my wife's name in full with every mark correct, and mine without adjectives. Donor profile, the founding gift that built the bridge. He tapped. The room, already a low noise, thinned as if someone had unfurled a net overhead and lifted the sound straight up. You know when a flock of birds changes direction all at once? It looks like one mind told 1,000 bodies to turn. That's how the cameras moved. A row of photographers at the foot of the stairs, who had been aiming their lenses toward the stage doors waiting for my son, lifted in the same second and swung, not toward the screen where the profile glowed, but toward the edges, toward the places where a story widens. They scanned faces the way a lighthouse scans water. One of them found me. I didn't flinch. I have been looked at before. It does not make the heart bigger or smaller. It only makes your skin aware of itself, like standing close to a fire you didn't light. The article did what the archive promised it would. It began with her, not with me. A paragraph about a nurse in a crowded clinic. Summers of free camps at the center. The small fun that grew because she wrote letters that made strangers feel like neighbors. Then it wrote my name and left it plain. A sentence about a founding gift that seeded a program with strict rules and a blind review process. It quoted the clause that barred trustees and donors from the selection committee. It listed dates and votes, not adjectives. Then, quieter, it said the program had been renamed last year, in her memory, when the fun crossed the threshold that meant it would never run dry. Underneath, a photo, her at the lake, hair pulled back, sun on one cheek, that look in her eyes that people mistake for gentleness until they see what it can lift. A reporter with a neat beard and a press. Badge approached with caution, as if I were a deer he might spook. "Sir, are you—" He looked down at his phone to make sure he had my name right, then tried again. "Would you be willing to say a word, for context?" I could feel the PR team's panic from across the lobby, like heat from an open oven. At the far end, my son's wife's mother put a hand to her throat and murmured fast to someone with a headset. The headset nodded and started toward me at a quick walking pace that wanted to be a run. The board member who had clapped my son's back so hard last night held his hands out like a man steadying a table with one short leg. "Let's not crowd," he said to no one, to everyone. "I'll say one word," I told the reporter. He lifted his microphone a little, surprised. "Spell her name right." He blinked. "We did," he said. You did," I nodded. "Thank you." I kept my voice flat and warm at once, the way my wife used to check a child's forehead for fever. "Do you have anything to add about the selection process?" he asked, trying to be careful, trying not to step into a trap that wasn't there. "No," I said. "The process speaks for itself." A second reporter slid in, quicker, a little hungry in the eyes. "Did your involvement influence the outcome?" he asked, and the headset tried to wedge his body between us, all apology and choreography. I looked at the second reporter as if he were a boy at the center who had just moved his rook like a knight. "No," I said again, and the record shows it. I didn't gesture toward the article. I didn't point at the foundation seal etched into the glass behind him. I let the air hold the words and cool them. Across the lobby, the stage doors opened, and my son stepped out into a new light. He saw the cameras turn and didn't understand, not for a heartbeat, why they were not already aimed at him. He's quick. The second heartbeat brought comprehension. The third brought the press smile he keeps in his pocket for storms. The smile wavered just for a breath, when he followed the angle of those lenses and found me where I stood by the column. There are looks a father recognizes even if years and headlines sit between. The look of a boy who expects to catch a ball and sees out of the corner of his eye that it is already in the glove of the man who taught him to throw. Not jealousy, not yet. A recognition that the story is larger than his stage. He adjusted his tie. He stepped down into the crowd. The mother-in-law tried to steer him toward the backdrop with the logos. He yielded a step, then another, then stopped and shook her hand off with a small kindness that was really a refusal. A foundation officer, the one with the careful hands I'd watched slide files across tables, appeared beside me like a shadow that knows your walk. "We're grateful," she said simply. No microphone, no camera, her voice pitched for my ear alone. It was time the history stood up straight. I nodded. "It always was," I said. "But I know committees. They have their own clocks." She smiled. "They do," she agreed. "Thank you for the clause about the profile timing. It prevented politics." Her eyes flicked just once toward the PR team, which had gathered into a small, tight circle like a school of fish. "You wrote it," I said. "I only signed it." She shook her head. "You asked for it, and you were patient enough to let it work." Patience, I thought, the unglamorous muscle. The one no camera cares for until it turns a body. A camera came close, not rudely. "Sir, can you stand where the light is better?" the photographer asked, gentle as a man asking to pass behind your chair. I stepped half into the sun. It laid a warm hand on my jacket and made the coffee stain on my tie faint as a ghost. The lens clicked. I looked, not at the camera, but through it, over its shoulder, beyond the glass doors, toward a street where a delivery boy balanced too many boxes on the back of a too small bike and still somehow made the light. Work is always happening where no one points. My son reached us on a path that took him longer than it should, because people pressed him with questions he hadn't practiced. A young woman asked him what it felt like to be the first recipient named in a program founded by his own family. He said, "It's complicated," and for once the room liked him more for the truth than for the Polish. The board member hovered 2 paces behind him, unsure whether to usher or retreat. The mother-in-law decided to retreat and did it with dignity, which, to be fair, is its own skill. The PR headset tried to repair the angle of the day with words like honor and legacy. Words will do any job if you pay them enough, but some jobs belong to silence. He stopped 3 steps from me. Up close, he looked tired, as if the video editor who had cut me out of his past had used the wrong blade on his present and nicked it. For a second, the father and the cameras and the Grant and the claws and the safe and the lake all existed at the same time in the same square of air. A person can feel that density and think it is weight. It is not. It is only story, pressed. "Sir," a different reporter said, the careful one who had texted me last night, "could you tell us about the memory in the photo, the lake?" I could feel my son listen, the way you feel a child listen from the next room when you say his name without raising your voice. "She liked early mornings," I said, "before the world decided itself. We would sit where the rocks warmed the fastest. He would skip stones. I didn't turn my head toward my son. I didn't need to. The photo would do that for me. She believed in work that didn't need a witness to be true, that's all." The reporter lowered her microphone a little, as if it had become too heavy. "Thank you," she said. She had the sense to leave. Not all of them did. Another voice from the edge. "Will you be seeking a more active public role now that—" "No," I said, and the word closed a door softly. "You don't have to slam a door to keep out the wind. You only have to latch it." Phones kept chiming, the way cicadas keep singing even when you've stopped listening. The profile spread like summer shade across every screen it could find. Someone projected it on one of the lobby's glass walls. Her face at the lake, the line about the claws, a sentence about blind review that linked to the PDF of the policy itself. I didn't ask for that. Transparency does not need applause, it needs light. A volunteer at the check-in table said, to no one and everyone, "This is actually better," in a voice that sounded like a student who finally understands a math step that had always looked like magic. The board member exhaled in relief because he could feel a scandal that hadn't fully formed dissipate like steam. The PR headset lowered his shoulders and began to tell a new story out loud so he could hear it himself. A program built from love that selected on merit. That's strong. He wasn't wrong. He just wasn't first. A young intern with nervous wrists approached me with a lanyard in her hand. "Sir, would you like to come to the dais?" she asked, as if the dais were a hilltop with a view I hadn't earned yet. "No," I said. "I can see fine from here." She hesitated. She had been taught to insist. Polite persistence is a job skill now. But something in my face told her that the map she'd been handed for this moment did not include my road. She nodded and tucked the lanyard back into her pocket, relieved to be spared a conversation her supervisor hadn't briefed her for. My son was still there, breathing through his nose like he used to do, when he was trying not to show he'd sprinted the last block to get home before curfew. He was close enough I could see the small scar on his chin, the one from the bicycle, the one that matches mine in the mirror if the light is wrong. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Before he could find the word that would feel both honest and safe, a photographer, not seeing the line between us, stepped into it and asked us to stand together for a shot. The room held its breath because it loves a neat picture more than it loves truth. I stepped half a pace toward my son, not to close the gap, but to keep the photographer from moving us like furniture. "Take your picture," I said, not unkindly, "but don't ask us to pose." He hesitated. He took the picture anyway. It's funny what lenses can capture when you stop feeding them. Behind the glass doors, outside on the steps, a small crowd had formed. Students, passers-by, a man with a delivery bag, a woman with a stroller. The information had traveled faster than feet. The sunlight slanted lower, making long shapes of us. All? A child in the stroller slapped her palms together and laughed at nothing in particular. Nothing in particular is what Joy loves. Two of the kids from the center, chess players with bottle caps for pawns, stood near the edge of the steps, eyes wide. They hadn't known their old chair fixer from the morning, had a name on a wall bigger than the center's bulletin board. One of them lifted his hand in a wave too shy to be seen. I saw it. I lifted 2 fingers at my side in the small hello my son once gave me on his first stage. The foundation officer touched my sleeve. "There's a quiet room, if you want it," she said. "To breathe." I smiled. "I've been breathing," I said. "We built this for air." She understood. She went to make sure the headline didn't kick up dust where it didn't need to. She would be the one to sweep without being seen. These are the people who make the world work. They don't cut ribbons. They tie knots that hold. As the crowd thinned into smaller groups, I felt the energy in the room shift from shock to arrangement. People began to sort themselves around a new shape of the day. Someone fetched a pen and tried to get me to sign a program. I gently turned the paper around and wrote my wife's name instead, in my best careful hand, the way she'd want it. "This one matters," I said to the woman holding the pen. She looked down and nodded. Later, she'd tape it to her office wall next to a calendar her assistant forgot to flip last month. It would remind her of the difference between brand and story. They are cousins. Only one will come see you when you're sick. A message blinked on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. A simple photograph of the center's notice board, the schedule I'd smoothed this morning. Someone had stuck a yellow sticky note in the corner with one word: seen. No signature. I didn't need one. I put the phone back in my pocket and felt the photograph of my wife press lightly against my heart like a second hand checking the time on the first. Around us, sentences kept trying to settle. You could hear it in the way people ended their thoughts with ellipses that wanted to be periods. Well, that explains. So the origin really was, I didn't realize the clause. It makes sense now that the cameras had their pictures, the reporters had their quotes, the board had its relief, the PR team had its new talking points. None of that was my work. My work was done years ago at a kitchen table with a rubber stamp and a boy who pressed too hard and left a star where no one expected one. My son took a breath that gathered himself back into a body. He looked at me like a man at sea who has finally seen the shape of land he had always sailed by without naming. He didn't speak yet. Sometimes silence is the only honest bridge between two shores after a storm. We stood inside it together for a count that wasn't about numbers. Outside, a Stalby siren wailed and then faded. A pigeon landed, head bobbed, decided we were uninteresting, and flew. Someone laughed at a joke I didn't hear. The light shifted, the long shadows shortened by an inch. The world, indifferent and kind, kept doing its jobs. A young host nearest the door cleared his throat. "We're moving to the courtyard for the community questions," he announced, soft enough not to break anything, loud enough for the microphones to catch if they wanted to. The courtyard was where the people without badges would ask what they really cared about. Does the clinic get more gloves? Will the tool be cheap enough for a village school? Can my niece apply if she doesn't have the right papers yet? Questions that look simple until you try to answer them without lying. That was the room I had built in my mind when we first put money in a jar on the kitchen counter. Not a ballroom, a courtyard. The crowd began to pour that way, and the cameras, faithful to their herd instincts, turned with them. A few stayed, enough to make a circle that felt like a small clearing in a large wood. My son didn't move. He watched the current flow and knew, I think for the first time in a long time, that he had a choice that didn't involve a stage. The choice to stand still and let the truth breathe past him without trying to cup it in his hands. The choice to ask a question instead of answering one. He swallowed. The muscle in his jaw jumped the way it does when he tries not to say something he will regret. "Baba," he said at last, very quietly, and the syllables, simple as bread, broke something gently in the air between us. I did not move. I did not smile. I kept my face as steady as a lake. The next words would matter more than any toast, more than any headline, more than any clipped video. They would not be performance. They would be the part of the record that doesn't make it to paper. I let the moment sit. You don't rush bread out of the oven because the hungry have been loud. You tap the crust and listen for the hollow that tells you it's ready. The circle around us leaned in without knowing why. The cameras that remained found a focus and held it. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "This is it." The way people do at the theater right before the reveal, forgetting that real life does not owe them a cue. He opened his mouth again, the line that would travel farther than the profile, the one that would leave a mark not on screens but on us, gathered behind his teeth. I could see it in the way his eyes, wide for a moment, narrowed into the shape they had when he used to try to balance on the curb without stepping into the street. He was about to step. I met his gaze so there would be no question about who stood on the other side. Not a rival, not an audience, a route, the thing the wind cannot take. The courtyard doors opened, spilling the sound of questions that matter into the lobby. Caught between two rooms my son chose, he didn't speak to the reporters. He took one slow step closer to me. The cameras adjusted. I could hear the click of their shutters like distant rain beginning after a long, hot day. I held my breath the way a man holds it when he leans over a pond to see if the fish will take the bread from his palm. Not fear. A hope that doesn't need witnesses to be true. He stood there with that one word between us, simple and heavy as a loaf on the table, and for a breath, nothing else moved. I heard the building breathe, the vents, the faint click of a thermostat, the scrape of a shoe on stone. He looked like a man learning the feel of his own name after trying on titles that didn't fit as well as he had hoped. I let the silence hold us up because when you rush a moment like this, you turn it into a performance, and I have had my fill of those. He swallowed. His eyes flicked toward the courtyard doors where the community questions waited, then back to me, like a swimmer looking from the ladder to the deep end and not knowing yet which one is the shore. "Walk," I said softly. Not an order, a direction. He nodded once, small, like the boy who used to nod at the lake when the stone caught one more skip than he expected, and fell in step beside me. We didn't push the crowd. We threaded it. The cameras keeping their respectful distance and still somehow close enough to drink our breath. The mother with the sleeping boy adjusted her grip and gave me a tired smile that felt like forgiveness for something I hadn't asked for yet. The board member stepped aside. He had the sense to see when he was no longer the center of anything. The headset hovered until the foundation officer touched his elbow and whispered something that made him deflate a measure. The glass doors swung and a different air met us. Cooler, with the smell of damp stone and a hint of the herb garden someone had convinced the city to plant along the courtyard edge. People shifted, making room not because anyone told them to, but because attention is an old river that remembers its path. There was no stage out here, just a low wall and a circle of benches that had learned 1,000 kinds of listening. The first question came without a microphone. A woman in a clinic polo lifted her chin. "We're short on gloves by the second week of every month," she said, not angry, not timid. "We know the grant isn't a magic well. We just want to know if the shipment schedule can match the rush after the field days." My son opened his mouth to reach for a sentence he keeps for moments like this, one with numbers that sound like answers but aren't. But I lifted a hand, palm down, the sign my wife used when a child needed a small quiet to make room for the right word. "Next month the delivery comes on the 10th, I said, still looking at the woman. "But the supplier's trucker takes the south road and loses a day to the highway work. We'll reroute him to the east bypass. It gets you 2 extra nights worth of boxes before the line starts at dawn. Amna at the center keeps a tally when the chess table's clear. We'll match it." The woman nodded once, like someone told a detail she suspected but needed to hear in a voice that didn't flinch. "Thank you," she said, and the way she said it told me the thank you was for seeing the work, not for speaking. A teenager in a faded hoodie asked if his cousin, here on a student visa that had grown too tight, could apply to the summer lab. "She can," my son said too fast, and looked at the foundation officer for a cue he hadn't needed had he read the policy himself. The officer met the boy's eyes over my son's shoulder. "Yes," she said, "we don't tie opportunity to paperwork." The boy exhaled like someone had handed him back a month he thought was already gone. The PR headset tried to appear at the edge with a microphone to formalize what had chosen to be human, and I shook my head without looking at him. "No mics," I said quietly. "This isn't a show." He backed up, chastened but grateful. "There are rooms even publicity knows it should not wire." My son looked from face to face and then down at his hands, at the neat line where his cuff met his wrist. For the first time since the morning, I saw the habit of performance peel back. Without it, he looked thinner and more durable, like a rope without the decorative braid. Questions found their own order, not about legacy, about a gasket in a clinic sink, about a shipment of tablets that had arrived with dead batteries, about whether the app the team built assumed everyone owns a phone that can hold it, about the smallness of real change and the way small things must be stacked in the right pattern, or they fall over as a big thing that looks impressive for a day. My son answered what he could. He is not an idiot. He knows the work, just sometimes through glass. When he tripped on a detail, I did not catch him with a speech. I let the foundation officer or the nurse in the third row fill the gap. There's a way to teach in public without turning the student into a lesson. He turned to me finally in a seam between questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not accusing now, not performing. The words had the nakedness of a child asking why a storm didn't write ahead to say it was coming. I kept my eyes on the courtyard, on the faces that had brought their day into this circle and trusted us to hold it. "Because you stopped listening long ago," I said, my voice flat, not unkind. The words didn't echo, they decided to stay. He took them in like a swallow that stings a throat before it warms a chest. He nodded once for all the times he had turned away, thinking there would be more time later to turn back. "I'm listening now," he said. There was no brave lift of the chin with it, just a sentence that understood its job. A small boy near the herb garden was spinning on one. Heel, bored with adults and their careful mouths. He lost balance, toppled, skinned a knee on the pitted stone, and choked on a breath he wasn't sure how to let out. My feet moved without asking the room for permission, the way they have always moved toward a child who has forgotten that falling is not the end of anything. I crouched, held my palm out. He took it. "Up," I said, and he stood, lip tucked between his teeth, brave as a sparrow. His mother mouthed an apology. I shook my head. "All our knees look like that under the fabric," I told the boy, and he grinned, surprised to be included in the secret. I straightened. My son was watching me like a man reading instructions he had thrown away years ago, and then found, smoothed, and finally understood. He took a step to the woman who had asked about the gloves. "We'll reroute the truck," he said, this time not for the benefit of any camera. "I didn't know about the bypass. That's on me." She shrugged. "Know it now," she said. "Bring coffee next time you come talk to us. The cheap stuff, not the kind that tastes like a candle." He laughed, the involuntary kind that comes from remembering you are human. And I felt something give in the tight place behind my ribs where this day had been sitting since morning. A man with a delivery bag at his feet raised a hand. He looked at my son, then at me, then at the little crowd. "It's good," he said, "to know whose name is on the beginning. But what happens if the beginning doesn't like where the middle goes?" He wasn't being clever. He was being exact. I met his question. "The beginning put a clause in the middle," I said, "so that the end can stand without asking anyone's permission." A few faces leaned forward the way people do around a chessboard when a move shifts the shape of the whole. My son's shoulders dropped a fraction. Relief looks like surrender from a distance. It isn't. It's the other side of fear. We kept going. A girl with braids asked why the lab closed at 6 when her shift ended at 6:30. "We can adjust," my son said before anyone else could speak, and he looked toward the officer without flinching. "Let's try 8 on Thursdays," he added, and a murmur of yes moved through the benches like wind through grass. Action is the only apology that doesn't bruise. You want to know about humiliation, about the part of the story that translates into the red lines of cameras and the short edits that make strangers argue in the comments. It wasn't a grand moment. It wasn't a slap of words that made the room gasp. It was this, a question from a boy who had ridden 2 buses to ask it. "Why did you say not to claim you?" he said, small but unafraid. His mother tried to hush him. He ducked away from her hand, kept his eyes on my son. The room went still the way rooms do when truth takes its first step to the front. My son closed his eyes for a blink that lasted, just long enough to kill a reflex. He opened them. "Because I was more interested in the angle of the picture than the shape of the story," he said. "It was wrong." He looked at me then, not for approval, not for a cue. "It won't happen again," he added. The boy nodded like a man and lifted his backpack with both hands as if it were heavier than books. My son's face did go pale there, not from shame alone, but from the relief of telling something true and surviving the telling. Someone asked to wrap it up, a phrase that belongs to boxes and not to people. And I felt the circle resist being tied with that kind of string. But the afternoon was sliding toward evening, and the herb garden had started to throw its smell higher as the sun warmed the dirt. We ended not because the cameras were done, but because the questions had been answered enough to buy the next day its chance. People stood, stretched, shook the stiffness out of legs. Hands were shaken. Names that had been ignored in lobbies were exchanged and kept. A kid in a jersey asked my son if he could hold the prototype tool. He said yes and crouched to show it without explaining it like a commercial. There are differences like that you can feel in your skin. When the courtyard began to loosen into groups, my son and I stepped back to the low wall. The foundation officer joined us, her clipboard at her side, pages curled under from use. "We'll put the Thursday hours on the board," she said, "and I'll draft the route change. I have the trucker's number." I nodded. "He'll complain about the toll," I said. "Tell him we'll cover it out of the vendor line for 6 weeks while the road's torn up. He'll hush." She made a check mark that looked like it held more weight than any signature I'd seen in a while. "You were right to let the profile run clean," she added under her breath. "If we'd buried it in the gala announcements, we would have been chasing questions for a month." She didn't need me to answer. We both liked maps that already accounted for the weather. My son stayed quiet until the officer had drifted to the next knot of people. "I told them to keep you out of the frame," he said. "No defense, no story." He said it like a man laying a tool back in its box because he has finally learned to use his hands. "I know," I said. He looked out at the benches where the last of the crowd was thinning. I thought the profile would make it look like you. Like we. He couldn't find the noun that would both accuse and absolve. I spared him the grammar lesson. "You thought the picture would break," I said. "It didn't. It just widened." He chewed the inside of his cheek, a habit he pretends he lost. "Why didn't you stop me?" he asked. I thought of the boy with the skinned knee, how he took my hand and then used his own legs to stand. "Because some falling teaches balance," I said. "Because I am not in the business of catching adults who run on polished floors and socks." He laughed then, a sound he must have learned long ago and forgotten he had. He scrubbed a hand over his face. When he lowered it, his eyes were a little red at the edges. He didn't apologize for that, and I did not look away to give him privacy. You can love a person without averting your eyes from their human water. "Baba," he said again, steadier, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to say no if it's wrong." He took a breath that drew a line under the day. "Will you sit with me tomorrow at the center while I take the walk-ins? No stage, just the table. I want to hear what I've been trying not to hear." The request didn't lift him. It made him heavier in the right way, more anchored. I thought of my wife's note on the back of the photograph. "Do the work, then let the work speak." "I'll be there," I said. He nodded, and you could feel the map of the next day unfold somewhere just beyond our shoes. We stood together a few breaths more, watching the courtyard return to its ordinary life. A stray cat, thin and confident, leapt onto the low wall and considered us with the evaluative stare only cats and old men can get away with. It settled, tail wrapped around its feet, and decided we were acceptable furniture for this hour. Somewhere a door banged, and the sound didn't mean anger, it meant a tired hinge that would need oil. I made a note in my head to bring a small can tomorrow. Oil is cheap, squeaks are not. Inside, the lobby had cooled in our absence. The press walls stood abandoned, logos repeating themselves into a quiet no one wanted anymore. A janitor began to loop his slow figure 8 with the mop, going around the sticky places where 2 sweet drinks had died. The gold lights found less to flatter. The PR headset offered me a brittle smile, then a smaller, genuine one underneath it. I gave him a nod that said, "You did your job, and then you didn't do it," and both were right. The board member approached with his hand out. "Good day," he said, the kind of sentence men of his age and salary use when they want to shake yours without making promises. "Good day," I said, because there are kinds of politeness that lubricate the hinges we all use. At the door, the mother-in-law waited, chin high, dignity intact. She looked at me like a chess player who has just realized the endgame began 12 moves ago. "Your clause was neat," she said. Compliment, accusation, admiration, all braided. "It was necessary," I said. "Neat isn't the point." She held my gaze a beat, then inclined her head. "He will be fine," she said. And for the first time all day she sounded like a mother, not a manager. "He will," I agreed. We both knew fine was a long road with gravel. She stepped aside. The city air reached in and tugged my jacket with a small, familiar hand. We stepped out together, my son and I, into a light that had dropped just enough to soften the edges of everything that had tried to be hard. On the steps, the 2 chess boys waited, awkward and hopeful. They had a scrap of cardboard and a marker. "Can you sign?" one asked, shrugging as if to apologize for wanting a thing with ink. My son reached for the marker, then stopped and looked at me. I took it, wrote her name first, careful, each curve exactly where it had always wanted to sit, then mine in the corner like a witness. I handed the marker to my son. He hesitated, then wrote the word Thursday and a time. The boys grinned like the world had given them a new square on the board. "We'll be there," one said. "Come," I answered, the easiest promise I'd made in years. Down the steps, the delivery man from earlier mounted his bicycle, boxes stacked too high again, balance better this time. He pushed off and caught the green. The sky over the municipal tower was the color of clean dishes. We walked toward the street, our shadows long and thinner than we felt. He kept his hands out of his pockets now, as if ready to carry something that was finally the right weight. At the curb, he stopped. "One more thing," he said, and he was back at the lake, cheeks pink, hair damp, asking if he could climb the fence one more time, just to see if he could land without stumbling. "That profile," he said. "I'm glad it started with her." I nodded. "Everything does," I said. He looked at me like a man who has just learned the name for the pattern he's been walking on for years. The traffic light changed. We crossed. The city carried us forward, not because it had been told to, but because moving was what it knew how to do. Morning came with a soft light that made the cracks in the sidewalk look like handwriting. I carried a paper bag that sweated a circle of oil where the cheap coffee cups leaned, and a small can of hinge oil that clicked against my keys. My son walked beside me without speaking, hands out of his pockets, eyes awake in a way I hadn't seen on him in a while. The center door stuck the way it always did after a damp night. I set the bag down, put 2 drops on the hinge, worked it back and forth until the metal remembered how to be kind. "Better?" he said. I nodded. We went inside. The place had its morning smell, paper warmed by sun, old books, detergent, last night's chalk dust. Amna waved her rag at us like a flag. "You're early," she said. "We were late for too many things," I answered. She laughed and took the coffee without ceremony. "Good," she said. "This tastes like work." We moved 2 tables together, not a dais, a surface for elbows. He took off his jacket and folded it over a chair like a man setting aside uniform to use his hands. "Walk-ins," he said, as if naming them would make him worthy of them. "Walk-ins," I repeated, letting the words sit. They came in a trickle that became a stream. A man with a slip of paper, more creases than words. A girl with a lanyard and a tight mouth. A grandmother who had lost the charger that kept her tablet from going dark. "Sit," I said to each, and the chairs scraped polite music across the floor. I didn't lead. I watched my son lean forward and ask the right questions, not the polished ones. When he reached for a sentence that was meant for a panel, I tapped the table with one finger, and he heard the signal, the quiet my wife used to make room for a better word. "What happens after 6?" he asked the girl. "I closed the store," she said. "I missed the bus. I missed the lab." He looked at the clipboard. He didn't talk about policy. He wrote her name next to the new Thursday hours and circled it twice. "Come at 7, he said. "If the door is stuck, push hard. We oiled it." She smiled like a person who has finally been told the house key is under the 3rd brick, not the 2nd. At 10, the delivery trucker called. He had opinions. All truckers do. I put him on speaker. "East Bypass," he said. "Toll's a joke." "We'll cover it for 6 weeks, my son said before I could. He glanced up at me, a question in his eyes. "That right?" I nodded once. "Then we'll see if the South Road remembers how to be a road," he added. The trucker snorted. "Fine, I'll call when I hit the split." He hung up with the abrupt kindness of people who measure friendship in favors done on time. Between walk-ins, my son kept catching me with half a thought in his face. "Say it," I told him, when it happened the 4th time. He leaned back, rubbed his thumb along a nick in the table's edge like he was reading a hidden sentence in the wood. "When the headline came," he said, "I was angry for half a breath. It felt like the story was slipping away from me." He swallowed. "Then I read the line about the claws, and the picture in my head changed shape." He stared at his hands. "You did all of this so that if I was chosen, it would be because the work fit the work." "Yes," I said, "and if you were not chosen, the work would still fit the work. This is the point." He nodded. It hurt him and healed him in the same motion. Good medicine does that. A boy from the chess table wandered over, button pawn in his palm. "Can we have more boards?" he asked, not shy, not rude. "We have 6 boards and 10 weights," he explained, counting with his thumb against his fingers. 10 weights is 3 arguments and 1 almost fight. I looked at the shelf where the old boards leaned. "We'll make 4 more," I said. "Bring me cardboard, stiff. Bring me a ruler. Bring me your patience." He sprinted off to fetch what we needed. My son watched as I drew grid lines, straight and careful. "This is how it happens," he said, half to himself. "This is how everything happens," I answered. "Lines, then squares, then play." By noon, the room had found its rhythm. The girl with the lanyard returned with a single cupcake. For the hinge, she said, setting it down like a trophy. A volunteer taped a new sign near the door. Thursdays until 8. Someone slipped a note under the kettle. Toll covered until road is fixed. A reporter from yesterday stood in the doorway and raised her hand as if the center were her school. "May I ask one question off the record?" she said. I gestured to a chair. She didn't sit. "Why did you wait a year to let the profile run?" My son looked at me. I could have given the pretty answer about humility. I didn't. "Because people look at names and stop reading," I said. "We needed them to read." She put her phone away like a promise. "That makes sense," she said. She left without taking a picture. Around 2, the mother-in-law appeared, heel clicks, a silk scarf that tried to command the room, and then realized the room already had its own orders. She saw the line of people and changed the shape of her face to fit the place. It was a good change. She waited. When it was her turn, she put down a small box. "For the glove shortfall," she said. "From us." Quietly. It wasn't miserable money. It wasn't performative. My son met her eyes. "Thank you," he said, and you could hear the thank you land on the right shelf. She looked at me last. "I prefer neat," she said, a ghost of a smile. "But I will work with necessary." "Good," I said. "Necessary lasts." We closed the door at 4:30 because you cannot pour forever without refilling the jug. The room kept its warmth like a hand around a cup. My son exhaled into his palms and looked like a runner who has just learned the right way to breathe. "Now you know the sound of the work," I said. He nodded. "It's quieter and louder than I thought." He picked up a fallen pawn button, rubbed it clean on his sleeve, and set it upright on the new board. Then he turned to me with a face that had lost a layer of something I do not miss. "Baba," he said, "come home with me. I want to show you something." "Home," I repeated. It fit in my mouth and didn't hurt. In his apartment, the walls had been staged for photographs for so long that the air seemed to pose even when we were alone. He had cleared a corner, though. The softbox lights were folded. The decluttered shelves held actual books with dog-eared corners. On the table lay a photograph of the lake, a copy printed from the article. He had taped my wife's note on the back in a careful hand. "Do the work, then let the work speak." "I think I've been afraid to let anything speak if I wasn't the one holding the microphone," he said. "Fear makes people loud," I said. "Silence makes work bigger." He touched the tape as if it were a seal on a door he was finally ready to open. "I'm going to carry this in my bag," he said, "so I hear it when my phone shouts at me." I reached into my jacket and took out a key. Brass, thumb warm from the years. He looked at it like a man who recognizes a shape he used to trace in his sleep. "The safe," I said. "But more than the safe. It opens the drawer under the mixer where your mother used to keep the rubber stamp." He laughed, startled. "The crooked star?" "The crooked star," I said. "If you must stamp anything, stamp that. It will remind you to press less hard." He rolled the key in his palm, then closed his fist around it like a promise meant for his own bones. "I don't deserve this yet," he said. "No one deserves metal," I said. "You use it or you don't. The deserving grows after." He went quiet, the thick kind. "I was cruel," he said, as direct as a cut. On the steps, at the dinner, in the hallway, in my head for a year. I did not rescue him from his own sentence. He held it. He didn't drown. "I wanted to be the whole picture," he said, without asking who painted the wall. He shook his head, a small, tired movement. "I am sorry. Not a performance, not for witnesses." He said it like a man setting a heavy box down where it belongs. "Good," I said. "Keep that sentence. Use it on the days when you want to reach for something shiny." He managed a smile. "You and your sentences," he said. "They're sturdier than my slogans." I shrugged. "Slogans sell the day, sentences hold the night." We walked out in the blue hour that makes a city look honest. He fell into step the way he used to when he was small and wanted to match my stride. On the main road, the billboard with his face had already been swapped for an ad that promised summer bodies by autumn. He stopped and laughed softly at the emptiness of it. "That was fast," he said. "Speed is not proof," I said. We turned down toward the lake before either of us said the word. The water was a dark plate, the thin line of light along the far shore like a seam being sewn by a steady hand. We stood at the rocks where mornings had taught us how to begin. He picked up a stone and felt its weight. I haven't done this since. He didn't finish because we both knew when. He threw. The stone skipped once, twice, 3 times, failed on the 4th. He grinned anyway. You used to press too hard, I said. Still do, he answered, affectionate toward his own flaw. We sat. The air smelled of wet leaves and old wood. A heron, unhurried, lifted itself from the shallows and went about its business. After a long quiet, he spoke without looking at me. At the panel, he said, I said the future belongs to those who show up unclaimed. He winced a little at his own words. I thought I meant independent. I meant unrooted. That's not strength. That's drift. He drew his finger along the wet stone between us, as if tracing a river he had mistaken for a road. Claim isn't a brand, he said, trying language like a pair of shoes he hadn't earned but wanted. To grow into? It's responsibility. It is, I said. To people, to work, to the first hands that held you upright. He nodded. Claim me, he said then, and the words startled a bird off the near branch. Not in public for cameras, in the parts of me that make decisions when the room is empty. He looked down at his palms. I have been a stage. I want to be a room. He flushed, embarrassed by the metaphor. You understand? He added. I did. I put my hand on his shoulder. Not a touch for anybody's lens. A weight that said, I am here and will be when the picture changes again. He let it rest there. He didn't shrug it off. He didn't ask for it to press harder. He simply held under it, straight. We stayed until the light went thin and the mosquitoes held counsel. On the walk back, we passed the bakery with the tray for bread ends. The owner was sweeping. He looked up, recognized me from his doorway nights, and held out a heel without words. I took it, broke it in 2, handed half to my son. We ate, not talking. The salt and the chew grounding us in a way no speech can. At the corner, we split toward our 2 houses. Tomorrow, he said. Thursday, I said. 7. He nodded and set off with the key in his pocket, making a small, bright sound when it knocked against his phone. At home, the kitchen was dark but not lonely. I lit the small lamp that makes the table look like it's telling a story, even when it isn't. I took down the safe curtain and opened the door. Papers, the leather folder. The scholarship letter with the star faded almost to a whisper. I didn't open any of it. I only placed my wife's photograph on top where it could see daylight when I swung the door tomorrow. We did it, I told the picture. The work spoke. He heard. The house answered with the soft sounds houses use when they agree. Wood settling, the fridge remembering, the clock finding the next second and offering it without drama. Before I slept, I wrote a note and pinned it to the center's notice board in my head, because sometimes you write a thing in your mind first, so your hand knows what to do in the morning. It said, families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. They build rooms you can enter when you're ready to listen. It wasn't poetry. It was a rule. We had not always kept it. We would now. You've walked with me to the end of this road. You've seen the hand fall, the cameras turn, the claws do its quiet work, the courtyard ask and answer, the lake return what it always kept. You know by now that I don't win with shouting. I win with a hinge oiled, a truck rerouted, a Thursday hour extended, a key pressed into a palm when the palm is ready to keep it. If you felt any part of this, tell me where you're reading from. Put your city, your street, your lake, your chess table in the comments so I can imagine the map of eyes that held this with me. If this story spoke to you, if it made you remember a hand you brushed off and wish you hadn't, or a name you forgot to spell right, like it, share it, and say one thing out loud to someone who needs to hear it today. Let the work speak in your place, then come back and tell me what it said.